Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Contrast. My name is Alan.
And I'm Nisha.
On this podcast, we talk about movies and the books that they're based on.
The catch is you watch the movie and I read the book with a few exceptions.
That's right. And today we're going to be talking about The Talented Mr. Ripley
by Patricia Highsmith, and its accompanying movie and TV series.
2 different movies, in fact.
2 different movies. Yes, that's right.
There's even more to choose from.
Yeah. Which we might talk about another time. We haven't decided.
Yeah.
The Talented Mr. Ripley is a 1955 psychological thriller by Patricia Highsmith. It follows con man Tom Ripley as he goes to Europe, originally to persuade Dickie Greenleaf to return home. And it follows twists and turns and deaths and impersonations and a lot of just vibing in Europe.
Yeah, the initial premise sort of completely goes away about, I would say, just short of halfway through.
Yeah, that's a pretty good estimate.
Yeah, but it all, of course, ties together pretty nicely.
Mm-hmm.
So Patricia Highsmith is a pretty well-known, like, kind of mystery thriller author from especially, the mid-century era.
Yeah, she also did Strangers on a Train, right? Which was an Alfred Hitchcock movie.
And you even see some sort of Hitchcockian kind of, influence in a couple of these adaptations on screen as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think they definitely, both of their styles mesh together well.
It makes sense.
So in terms of adaptations, like you said, I watched 2 different film versions and then the more recent TV show, which just released this year in 2024. Some of the ones that we're not going to talk about, at least in this episode, there was another kind of loose adaptation of the original film, which is a Tamil language film. Mm-hmm. It's called Non, which I did not watch.
But you wish you had watched.
I mean, I'm very curious. We both like to watch Tamil and other, films like that, and it's interesting. I never knew that existed. I think it was made in 2012 or something around there.
Something like that.
So just kind of interesting that it exists. I'm pretty sure, just from my very light reading on it, that it's a very loose adaptation. But there is something, I would say, kind of classic about this story and some of the tropes that it uses. So it makes sense that it would be kind of a starting point for so many different stories.
Yeah, and I could see it being a big inspiration for a lot of thrillers and stuff like that, while still being quite unique in a lot of aspects too, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to talk about some of that, the kind of the legacy that I feel like it's imprinted upon culture and even films in the last few years. I think we're kind of entering a new cycle of this kind of story, which is interesting. But real quick, I just want to mention that this is also something that turned into a book series.
Yes, there are 5 books.
Right. Only 2 of those have also had some sort of screen adaptation. And again, we're not going to discuss any of these in length. We didn't read or watch any of these.
No.
But just some interesting things. So the second book in the series, called Ripley Underground, that was also adapted into a film in 2005, and that stars Barry Pepper as Tom Ripley.
Who the heck is Barry Pepper?
You would recognize him if you looked him up. Maybe give it a quick Google. I'll make some people angry by saying this, but he's kind of like a discount Austin Butler. Is how he looks to me.
Oh, yeah, kind of.
He's been in a lot of things, so that is sort of, diminutive of him, but it's...
we're just describing how he looks as discount
right,
Austin
absolutely.
Butler.
Yes.
This is not a reflection on anything that he's done or anything else.
Very successful actor, been in lots of good films, but yeah, so I've never seen that movie. I don't think it's, super largely seen or anything. And then number 3 in the series was actually adapted twice. That's called Ripley's Game. So it was originally adapted in 1977 under the title The American Friend. And that starred Dennis Hopper as Tom Ripley, which makes me very curious.
Okay.
Just, the unhinged madness of Dennis Hopper as Tom Ripley has to be something to behold. I don't know how well I think it would work, but
I feel like it could go either really well or really poorly.
Right. And then that book was also adapted one more time in 2002 on the heels of the very popular 99 adaptation of the original. And that's starring John Malkovich as Tom Ripley.
No, that's not something I expected.
Right. Yeah. So he has some other connections that we'll talk about. He appears in a couple of these adaptations as well.
You know, speaking of all these actors, I kind of want to talk a little bit about maybe what Tom Ripley looks like.
Yeah, let's get to that in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, as we start to delve in, I definitely want to delve into that, and the characters I think are one of the biggest points of conversation in this about this book.
Yeah. Okay.
And especially having seen multiple screen adaptations of it, they follow so many of the same beats, but the characters are all so different. Like you perceive them all so differently in each version.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to talk through it with you about how you perceive them in the book, and then maybe pin down which, version or which portrayal might fit it the best.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just wanted to also briefly mention, like I said, that, it's kind of grown into its own genre. Like, I think there's a lot of aspects of this that follow a pretty typical, like, thriller narrative. But at the same time, like for when this book was released, I feel like it did introduce a lot of new aspects to that have since then been folded into this genre. So it almost feels like it's, retroactively, it doesn't feel super unique or original in a lot of ways, but it really kind of informed a lot of that going forward.
Okay, that's interesting. I guess I haven't read a lot of thrillers per se, but I felt like it was pretty unique.
It's great. I mean, I think it does a great job at what it does.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the books that set the tone, for me, they always feel a little unique. Like Dracula is a good example. People sometimes think it feels tropey, but I still felt like it was really unique and interesting because everything that comes after it is still trying to capture something that they can't quite capture. It's always a little bit different. It's not the same.
Yeah, sometimes it's you end up noticing the copy because it's, that's what it is. It's a facsimile. It's not the same original thought.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, so just in the past couple of years, there's been a few movies that like really kind of capture some of this, the themes of this book and some of the tropes that are in it. Most notably, I think the aspect of, class divide and wealth disparity,
which has been a huge topic lately.
A huge topic, and we'll definitely get into some of the details of how that comes through in this book, but it's a massive part of the story, right? We essentially have this lower class person trying to insert himself in high society and through multiple avenues. And so kind of that commentary has been done a lot recently. Again, I think it's on a lot of people's minds right now, especially here in, late 2024. There's been some happenings that definitely, I think, tie into this. But yeah, just some of those, like, I mean, we had Parasite several years ago, which kind of played on it in a very different way, but it was still that kind of like infiltration of the lower class into the higher class.
Yeah. I was thinking about Parasite today and I didn't really think about why, but now that you mention it, it really is that like Tom Ripley really is invading and he's like himself being a parasite and clinging on to Dickie Greenleaf.
And in those same ways, it's, you can look at it from a high viewpoint and say like, oh, these individual actions are not something that should be celebrated, right? But you're also very understanding of these characters when they do it, and it kind of gets you on their side in a weird way, even though you're kind of not supposed to be.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so that's I definitely found a connection there. And then there's been a couple others, like there were two in 2022 that kind of fit this theme, The Menu. And Triangle of Sadness.
Okay, I don't know Triangle of Sadness.
They're both through various means, some kind of lower class people find themselves. These are less so like an invasive way that they're trying to do it, but they find themselves with higher class people and then find themselves in certain situations that get out of hand. And it shows kind of how those two mindsets meld together and how they differ.
Yeah, it's always fun when these things get a little out of hand, too. It's one thing if you're just kind of infiltrating the upper class.
Right,
like, But I think Pride and Prejudice, and that's not really infiltration, but like trying to get in with Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley and stuff. And they're a completely different class from the Bennets.
And even those two like approach their place in the world quite differently, when it comes to that. Yeah,
but things don't go horribly wrong like in Parasite or The Talented Mr. Ripley. It's a little bit more tame. Still a great book, but much more tame.
Sure. Anyway, so some of these, like, they work better than me. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the last two movies I mentioned. I think there's a lot that don't really work in them, but, Parasite's a stone cold classic at this point.
Yeah, Parasite's great.
So there's a lot to explore with this, type of theme and genre. And then I would be remiss to not mention Saltburn from last year, which is, I mean, you could almost call it an adaptation of Mr. Ripley.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the setting is different and, kind of a lot of the mechanisms are quite different, but it's still this kind of like, sexy thriller, like, guy infiltrating this family and kind of taking over someone's lives, and and that movie ended up, I mean, much to my shock, becoming an absolute sensation last year. So again, there's some issues I have, especially with the filmmaking of that film, but it's certainly in this conversation.
Yeah, you can't deny it's Ripley-esque.
I mean, I'm just going to want to watch Ripley every time, but yeah,
that's fair.
It's still interesting, and I'm glad it introduced some of that to the wider audience.
Yeah. While we're talking about Ripley, and this is just kind of a fun fact about how my brain works, Andrew Scott is in the movie Ripley, or the show Ripley. I kept thinking there's this actor, he's not British, is he? No.
Andrew Scott, yeah.
He is British, yeah. So I was like, British actor, 2 first names. His first and last name are first names. And then my brain would go, you know who it is? Matt Lucas.
Yep, definitely. They basically look exactly the same.
So there were days of me trying to be like, it's not Matt Lucas. What the heck is his name? And I finally got Andrew Scott. So I finally remember his name. Both terrific, interesting people, but both gay.
Very different.
They're both gay, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of their one, and they're both British. That's about the extent of their similarities.
Okay, so enough about all these other, things that kind of weave into it. So just to give one more little background foundation here. So the 3 versions that I watched were the 1960 film Purple Noon, which stars Alain Delon as Tom Ripley. We'll delve into the details of this. This is probably the one that deviates the most, despite being the closest to the source material.
In time, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly, yeah. Only 5 years after the book was released, this one was made.
Yeah.
But there were quite a lot of changes made to it. And then we had the 1999 film. This is probably the most well-known, under the same title, Talented Mr. Ripley, which stars Matt Damon as Tom Ripley. And we'll get into the other cast as we go along. And then I also watched, as I said, the TV series that was released in 2024. It's just a mini series, 8 episodes, starring Andrew Scott as Ripley.
Yeah.
So we'll be focusing on all of those along with the book today.
Yeah, and I just want to point out 3 wildly looking different actors.
Totally different.
They look very... Well, I guess Alain Delon and Andrew Scott maybe aren't wildly different looking, but they don't look similar.
No, and they are so different in terms of their portrayal, like their personality and stuff.
Yeah.
It's complete opposites. And it's really funny. That's why I want to talk to you so much about how you perceive Tom Ripley in the book, because you have defenders of, like I said, they're so different in the way they portray Tom, but you have defenders saying that both of them are the perfect representation of how they pictured him in the book. So it's really interesting to see that.
That's really, really interesting. And then the last, of course, being Matt Damon, who is wildly different looking and everything from Alain Delon and Andrew Scott.
And he's kind of like the halfway point between those two and the way he acts,
Okay.
But yeah, anyway, so let's get into like some of the story here. So you gave like kind of the initial premise.
Yeah, so the story kicks off where we kind of see just how much poverty and how hard Tom's life is, learning about how he's an orphan and he was raised by his aunt, and how he kind of lives in like these poor conditions. He has a roommate who he's not very fond of. He's trying to get money through scams, and he's being followed in these bars, and he thinks the cops are after him, but it turns out to be Mr. Greenleaf. And it doesn't take a lot of convincing for Mr. Greenleaf, even though Tom Ripley does not know Dickie Greenleaf very well. It does not take a lot of convincing for Mr. Greenleaf, Herbert Greenleaf, I believe, to convince Tom Ripley to go to Italy and attempt to bring Dickie Greenleaf back to New York.
Yes. So essentially, we'll give a little background about who is Herbert Greenleaf.
He is a shipping magnate, I guess.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
A very wealthy family. Already you see huge class disparity in the first, like in the second chapter or something like that, where Tom goes to the Greenleaf house and they're super rich, super wealthy, and they're basically just flinging money at him to go get Dickie.
Right.
And Tom is like, yeah, absolutely, I'll go do this.
Yeah, so Dickie's kind of like just run off and he lives off, his trust fund or whatever from his father's shipping business. And, he's met this girl and wants to practice his art and everything. And so he's just very happily off in Italy and his father doesn't like it. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the book, he does send someone to track Tom down, correct?
No, he finds Tom. Well, maybe before the book starts or something like that.
And who's following him around?
Mr. Greenleaf.
Himself.
Is following Tom in the bars.
Oh.
Yeah.
He's doing it himself.
Yeah, he's doing the heavy lifting.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. That does not occur in any version on the screen.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, how did they find him?
Closest to that is in the series.
Okay.
Which is that he hires a private investigator to track Tom down.
Oh.
Which to me makes much more sense given his status.
Yeah. I'm missing a piece there as to how exactly he figures out. No, it's a friend says, they're talking to a friend who's like, oh, I think Tom Ripley knows Dickie. And then Mr. Greenleaf tracks down Tom.
Gotcha. Okay. So he's just trying to find anyone who knows about him. Okay, so that's one of the things that this is all... It all kicks off pretty quickly in every version of this. So there's not a lot of this background of, why does he want Tom specifically? This is one thing that I think that the 99 film does really well, is that they actually randomly come across each other. So Tom is he's filling in playing piano at this kind of ritzy rooftop party in New York.
That's a nice way to introduce Tom, too.
Yeah, and so what had happened was he ended up borrowing his friend's Princeton jacket to play. Mr. Greenleaf notices his Princeton jacket and says, hey, you're about the same age as my son Dickie. Did you go to Princeton? And that's when Tom pretends that he knew Dickie really well and that he went to Princeton.
Yeah, I think he also pretends he went to Princeton in the books, but it's different context.
I like that change. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it does make sense. I think especially for a movie where you can't have him moving from bar to bar, you don't have that time. You know what I mean? Like
true.
In the book, it works really well because you're immediately like, is this guy about to get arrested?
Yeah. And
you have a little while of him going around, and then finally he just encounters this guy and learns what's going on.
Yeah. For sure. And that's definitely that is captured in the series. Like if I had to summarize the series in one word, it would be paranoia.
Yeah.
And I think that's, from what I understand, pretty close to the themes of the book.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, this book is about impersonation and stuff like that. There's so much paranoia, yeah.
But there's not necessarily that level of it found in some of the other versions. So they sort of go different ways with it. And then I should also just mention that Purple Noon, again, much looser adaptation. Great movie. I want to say up front that I think that watching it in this context actually diminished it for me.
Okay.
Because it's not a good adaptation, in my opinion.
So, but I was thinking about it came so soon after, it almost feels like it was more inspired by as opposed to an adaptation. You know what I mean?
And that's kind of how I've started to think of it in my mind, for sure.
I mean, it even has a different name.
Yeah, because it is a great movie. But it's just not, it doesn't hit the same points the same way. So.
Are the characters named similarly or
similar? So Tom Ripley's the same, but the other characters are different. So we'll talk about that when we get to them. But it actually jumps so far into the story. It opens with Tom, Dickie, and Marge on a boat in Italy.
Oh wow! Okay.
So it doesn't have any of this backstory.
Yeah.
Anything at all.
They just leap right in.
Yeah. And then. A lot of these other things that you mentioned about who Tom is and how he lives are not shown to that same extent. Mm-hmm. There's no roommate. There's no, you kind of, especially in the series, you get this idea that he's kind of struggling to get by, but he's a con man.
Yeah. Yeah.
That at least gives you that background.
Yeah. So we move along and I almost said Dickie. Tom arrives in Italy. He has to travel through a few places, but in the end, he ends up in a place called Montebello. I believe that's how it's pronounced, but it's spelled with like a G instead of a T.
Oh, is that how it's supposed to be pronounced?
Yeah, I think so.
So they just, in any of the versions on screen, they call it Montebello.
Yeah, apparently that's incorrect.
Okay.
In the book, they actually, the whole time they pronounce it. So I listened to the audio book.
Fascinating.
And it's actually, they say Montebello, and then they make fun of at the end, they make fun of an American for calling it Montebello.
See, I've heard Montebello before.
Yeah.
I had never heard of Montebello before.
Yeah.
And even like Jude Law, who plays Dickie Greenleaf in the 99 version, he calls it like Manji all the time.
Yeah.
You know, just kind of shorthand. But that actually adds a lot, I think, to Dickie's character.
Yeah.
That we'll talk about.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, Dickie's quite fluent in Italian in the book. So I would think he would pronounce it correctly, but
it's an interesting choice though.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we'll talk more about it, but I definitely often get the feeling that Dickie is like, he's comfortable in the positions that he's in and in this world that he lives in and like high class, but that he's also not very like well versed in a lot of it.
Yeah.
You know, because he doesn't have to be.
Yeah. So there's sort of this arc throughout the book where you see that happen.
Yeah.
Where Tom is almost like, wow, this guy knows the ins and outs. So when he first meets them, they're on a beach and Tom feels super out of place because he's like super pale and so like pasty. So like wearing his like fancy shoes on the sand, and Dickie's this like tan, like sexy guy. And then by the end of the book, Tom is saying things like his Italian is better than Dickie's, and he now sees all the mistakes that Dickie would make in speaking. Right. So like there is that arc of like, you see first Dickie as this almost idolized like American in Italy fitting in and all that stuff. And then as you get to the end, you realize maybe he wasn't as like suave, and he was maybe a little bit out of place still.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that whole like kind of sequence that you're talking about from start to finish is one of the most fascinating parts about it, about how Tom changes so much throughout the course of this. Yeah,
he really changes.
Yeah. And I mean, it's even remarked upon several times by people, at least in the movies and stuff.
Yeah.
About, you know, that have known him for some, especially people like Marge.
You know? Yeah. There are people noticing differences about him for sure.
So how is Tom at the beginning? You know, I know you're saying like, yeah, he's this very pale, like out of place guy, but like, what's his kind of, you know, outside of you knowing he's kind of like a down and out con man, what else do you pick up about him in the beginning?
Well, I felt like he was a little shy and awkward.
Okay.
And he felt out of place, but he was still trying to like wheedle his way into things. Which he does quite quickly, but at first he's not super successful. Dickie's kind of like, I don't like this guy. I don't know anything about him. But then soon he's able to kind of switch back into that con man, like I can do anything, and like charming aspect. But it really at first he feels quite awkward and out of place, and like he stands out from all the Italians that he's surrounded by. And this Montebello is actually supposed to be quite a small town.
Right, yeah.
So
this is a very small, like kind of up on the hills coastal town.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think which adds to him sticking out. You know, because if you're in a small town and you're like the one person who's new and looks different and everyone else knows each other, you're going to stand out. So he has to pretty quickly start charming people.
And so that kind of fish out of water feeling is not anything that's like by design from him, right? That's just him trying to get his feet under him.
Yeah, I think so.
Because that's kind of the interesting thing is, you know, does he start as like he's kind of a shitty con man to start with, right? Like he's running these really small schemes in New York and he's getting by, but it's not anything to the level of what he eventually accomplishes. Right?
Yeah. I would say he has some success as a con man. One problem is that he keeps getting checks written to him under a pseudonym, so he can't cash them.
Oh, right.
So he has a bunch of these checks that he can't do anything with. So theoretically, he has like thousands of dollars, which is a lot of money at the time. But like, he can't do anything with it.
Right.
So he's hoping someone will send him cash. Like, that's the whole thing at the beginning.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, he's like posing as like a collections company or something.
For like medical bills or something. Yeah.
Like getting
or taxes. That's what it is. Taxes.
Basically getting people to double pay.
Yeah.
send him the money instead.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting scheme, you know?
Yeah, very interesting, except for the fact that he keeps getting checks and can't do anything with them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, so it's just an important note, I think, to like think about how Tom is and then how he will be towards the end. You know?
Completely different character.
So it's interesting. So again, in Purple Noon, it jumps straight in, so you don't really get some of that background.
Mm-hmm.
But
he's already tanned and shirtless.
Exactly. I mean, but we're talking about Alain Delon here. Like
he's always tanned and shirtless.
The beautiful epitome of man, you know, like.
Yeah.
So he's naturally like that. He's naturally charming. I don't think you could try to make him this like bumbling, naive person in the beginning. So maybe that's why they chose to skip all that.
Yeah. They had this whole opening written of this bumbling guy, and all of a sudden went, "Oh, that's not going to work. We hired the wrong actor."
Right. Exactly. So it's like I'm curious because it makes him so charming and effective as a con man, but it's also like, is that Tom Ripley? Mm-hmm. You know, that's what I am curious about throughout this.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like Matt Damon does the best job of that initially, at least.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of this, like, you know, very boyish. This is pretty young Matt Damon. He's definitely naive and a little shy, but he's, like, charming.
Yeah, and he's only supposed to be 25 in the book, or somewhere around the 24.
Yeah, he's still pretty young.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Andrew Scott, he's quite a bit older, which doesn't really factor into the performance, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't really question it.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, it definitely works. He does a great job, but he's so different in the show.
Really?
He's like honestly very off-putting.
Interesting.
I saw the performance described by someone, I forget who, as reptilian, and I kind of agree with that.
And that's kind of interesting because like a lot of this awkwardness that you see from Tom at the beginning is internal. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, yeah, he's like got the shoes and the pail and he sticks out, but he's trying to find his feet. And it's not necessarily like everyone being like, you stick out, but like, you know, he does stick out a little bit.
Well, it's like you almost feel sorry for him.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
So people aren't going to call it out as much.
Yeah, and he has to be charming at a certain point quite rapidly in the book to get in with Dickie.
Right.
So they can spend half the book romping around Italy.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just interesting to me that Andrew Scott would be described as like reptilian or anything like that when I feel like the character needs some level of charm.
Something, yeah.
To propel the plot forward.
Right.
So Tom Ripley pretty quickly gets in with Dickie by basically exposing everything his father Herbert Greenleaf asked of Tom.
Like he's supposed to be on this like secret mission.
Yeah. And
betrays it.
Yeah. And they have like a good laugh about it, which actually ends up working in his favor. And they end up becoming quite good friends. And after only a few days, Dickie asks Tom to come stay with him.
Right.
And they become these big bosom buddies. And that's when Marge, who is Dickie's friend, and she is there at the beginning also lounging on the beach. And she's very friendly and warm at the beginning, whereas Dickie's a little bit cold. She actually becomes the cold one and starts to feel left out as they do things like romp around Rome and get pass out drunk in the middle of the city and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's definitely like a somewhat competitive nature there, which, you know, deserves delving into also as we go through this. You know, there's some interesting themes to be found there too. But okay, so how, you know, we've talked about Tom, now he's met Dickie and Marge. Like, how do you kind of envision those two characters?
Well, I sort of like, and I think Patricia Highsmith did a good job of portraying them as friends early on. And like, yeah, you're not entirely sure what their relationship is, but there's nothing really romantic going on between them. So she does a good job of just these two friends kind of lounging on a beach, and Dickie's very cold. Marge is much more open and much more like, are you going to join us and stuff like that. And then as soon as Tom moves into Dickie's house, that's when you really see the switch. Obviously, Dickie warms up before Marge turns cold, but there is that like flip that happens where Marge becomes very like weird about Tom. And a few chapters later, you actually learn that she's accused him of being gay.
Okay.
Which at the time was not super well accepted.
Big deal. Yeah.
I would say I was really impressed with how Patricia Highsmith wrote about this, because she didn't write about it like it was a bad thing.
Right.
A lot of these authors at the time, even if they were open-minded, were still struggling with the things they had learned. And it didn't feel like that to me. It felt like she was like, yeah, some people are gay, and that's okay.
And I'm really curious how much you think that ties into these characters and motivations, and, you know, how much of a theme it is in the book. You don't have to get into it straight away. But
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely... I mean, there's that idolization of Dickie throughout, and just like the whole time, you know, it just becomes more and more this obsession with Dickie. But there's this really cool part where Tom cracks these jokes about how he doesn't have a preference between men and women. And like someone tells him to stop making those jokes, but he's like, but I really don't.
Right.
Like,
okay,
so it is like
almost openly says that he's bisexual.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is like out there that he is a queer man, you know, and he doesn't really have a preference between men or women. He goes for both.
Right.
Which I thought was really cool.
That is interesting, yeah. And it fits so well with the character and like kind of the happenings that go on.
Yeah.
Because you said the perfect word, in my opinion, which is obsession.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not really about love or lust or any of these. It's obsession. And it's a little hard to parse out, like, how much of that is an obsession with, like, Dickie's lifestyle, his status, you know, his money.
Him as a person,
his personality. Like, is there an element of, you know, Tom being in love with him?
Yeah, well, because also when Marge turns cold and Dickie starts being like, I need to spend more time with Marge, Tom is like so jealous and like upset about it. And he is like imagining Dickie kissing her and like all these things, which I was reading like some of the synopses and they talk about Dickie and Marge having a romantic relationship later on, but that's never actually explicitly seen in the book.
That's
from
crazy.
What I recognize, it's Tom imagining it happening. So it might not be happening. And then, in fact, Dickie is so adamant that he is not gay that I assumed he actually is gay.
Interesting.
So
that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's a bit of a surprise that they're not like, you know, inextricably linked as a romantic item, Dickie and Marge. Because in every film version they are.
Yeah, and I think that so in the book she's infatuated with him and she's in love with him. But he is not in love. He doesn't reciprocate necessarily. Yeah. Like, he thinks she's great. They're wonderful friends. They do everything together. But he's not trying to pursue something more, it seems. And I really thought it was interesting that all these summaries were saying that they developed a romantic relationship, where I can't think of a time in the book where that was explicitly shown and not imagined by Tom.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in every version, they are definitely a couple. I would say the series is maybe the closest to what you're describing. And that they're, you know, it's kind of like a toss-up, I guess. Like, they're definitely very close, but you could just say that they're friends. But in that version, Dickie is also like the least of a playboy.
Okay.
You know, he's kind of a playboy in all the other versions.
He's not really a playboy in these. He just wants to paint. He's just like, leave me alone. Let me paint.
So I kind of think that maybe the series did the best job of portraying him then.
Yeah.
That's what I was very curious about, because in that one, he's kind of like, he's a bit soft-spoken. He's very like self-assured.
Yeah.
But he's quiet and calm, and, you know, he has like moments of, you know, exclamation and whatever, but he's really quite like very good. He really reminds me of he's played by a guy named Johnny Flynn, who I'm not very familiar with at all.
Okay.
He really kind of has like the Marshall Erickson vibe going for him.
I have no idea who Marshall Erickson
Jason
is.
Segel in How I Met Your Mother.
Oh, okay.
Like, he's like the calmer one, the like, you know, sort of
Yeah.
I don't know. He just like had that very like, you could just chill with this dude.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, he seemed down to earth. Like, yes, he's high status and all this stuff, but like seemed down to earth.
Yeah. Okay. So this is also the point in the book. And this is what I really want to talk about, where Tom starts realizing he looks like Dickie Greenleaf.
Okay.
None of these actors sound like they look the same.
Not even a little
Which
bit.
is kind of a huge point in the book, is that Tom has Dickie's passport and looks like him. The only thing he does is lighten his hair and like change his mannerisms, obviously. But they're supposed to look alike and be very similar in size.
Which makes a lot of sense, especially in the book. Like, I feel like that's a smart way to go about it, right?
Yeah.
Is that they just happen to look similar.
Yeah.
You know, there's elements of that in terms of like how people talk about them. Like, you know, especially in the 99 film, like Marge and other people, Freddie, we'll talk about him shortly, but they all start to remark on like, wow, you're like turning into Dickie.
Okay.
You know, even though he doesn't look like him per se. But all of these versions, he does not. He like actually superimposes his own picture over Dickie's in the passport.
So here's what I think they should have done. You know the classic movie Parent Trap?
Of course.
With Lindsay Lohan and Lindsay Lohan?
They should have had someone double play. We'll see that's like... I mean, we're talking twins at this point.
But you could have like lightened one's hair, had them dressed differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
But that was my thought, was that they should have done a Parent Trap and had the same actor play both of them. Because it's kind of a huge point that they look the same.
At least the versions, you know, adapt appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which also just makes me laugh so much that, like, imagine being able to just literally steal someone's, like, very expensive life because you learn how to copy their signature and you super glue a picture of yourself over their passport. Like,
you're pretty good at photocopying.
Like, that's amazing. To live in the earlier times.
Yeah. I mean that's like honestly stuff you could have gotten away with in the 50s probably anyway.
You can't do that shit anymore.
No. And I think that is the way they should have handled it in the movies. Do not have Andrew Scott and Andrew Scott.
No, that would be crazy.
You can only do that for twins, really. It's too weird if it's just two guys who are supposed to look similar. But that was something that struck me while I kind of like would walk through the room and see you watching the movies. I would be like, I don't think they look the same.
No, it doesn't try to play that at all, really.
And something else, Matt Damon wears glasses a lot.
Yeah.
He doesn't wear glasses until the end of the book.
Oh, interesting.
That's like a whole point where he's like reassuming his identity.
Okay.
And I guess we've been talking about it so much, I'm just going to say it right now, is that Tom kills Dickie and steals his identity. Right. If that wasn't clear.
Pretty clear. At least the identity stealing part. Yeah. Pretty clear.
And we're getting to that point in the book.
But it's all just important for like setting up this whole conversation.
But yeah, so I just noticed Matt Damon wearing glasses, which again makes sense. You're trying to distinguish the two characters.
It's actually a really ingenious way to portray it on screen.
Yeah.
You know, where you know, because he's constantly going back and forth. Like even in my notes in doing this, it's like, Tom did this, but as Dickie, like, you know, and it's like this constant back and forth, but yeah.
Yeah, but it was very much him going back into this like demure kind of awkward, poor, lower class. And he goes, maybe I could get horn-rimmed glasses. Like that's literally a thought he has.
Fascinating.
And he's like, it's not in my passport photo, but I could do it. And so he puts on glasses at the end of the book.
Wow. That's something.
Yeah, so that was just another difference I wanted to bring up, was that I noticed Matt Damon was wearing glasses, and that's makes sense in the movies.
Yeah.
Is not how it works in the book.
That is funny though, like that he would just do it at the end, like kind of as a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and funny. Well, it also made me think: is this dude wearing fake glasses at the end? Does he have myopia and he's been squinting the whole time?
Like it's one or the other, you know?
Yeah. Or are these fake glasses? So, I just thought that was kind of funny that he suddenly is wearing glasses. And as someone who wears glasses, both of us wear glasses. It's kind of like, so either you were spending the whole book with your eyes half open trying to see everything, or these are fake.
You know, you do bring up a good point though in terms of this conversation of saying like it probably is a good idea to say up front that that's what this story turns into.
Yeah.
You know, and this isn't some major spoiler or anything either. Again, this happens somewhere between a third to halfway through.
Which, let us just say, that third to halfway through is them romping through Italy.
Of course.
There are no major plot developments except for Marge getting a little upset.
It's character development.
Yeah.
That's what's happening during this, which again is like such a huge piece of this is the characters. But
So I'm going to be honest real here. I felt like this book was written so Patricia Highsmith could go to Italy and romp around Italy.
Well, God bless her then.
I mean, yeah, God bless her. There's this thing authors do, which really gets under my skin, where they'll be like, go to the place you're writing about. And I'm like, that's the worst advice you could give a young, aspiring, poor writer. Go to Italy and romp around? How are they going to do that?
I mean, you just do it, right?
Yeah. Go live like Dickie Greenleaf.
But see, that's my ultimate draw to this story, I think, too.
Yeah.
So I'm like right there with her,
As you say, it's all about the vibes.
The vibes
man.
are immaculate.
Yeah.
Here.
And
I mean, just like you can get into the ins and outs of like the 99 film version being a good adaptation or like how effective it is as a thriller. Who does not want to just romp around Italy with Jude Law with an open shirt, short shorts on, riding his little Vespa around? Like, it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So that's like a lot of the book. And it sounds like that's a lot of that 1999 movie.
Absolutely.
That's actually why, and I said this to you earlier, but I thought that you would like the book more than I liked it.
Right.
Is because there's so much of them just vibing. And that doesn't grab me like it grabs you.
I'm curious how it would do for me in a book, though.
Yeah.
Because a book is very different. Like, yes, if it's ultimately setting up something important about characters or plot later, then it's like, yeah, sure, give me that. I can go through like maybe a little more than should be there for that.
Yeah.
But in a movie, it's so different, right? Because you're getting this visual artistry out of it. So if there's something really good about her writing during that, like I would appreciate it, but it's not going to hit me the same as a movie. Like again, in this, you're getting these beautiful ocean shots and mountaintop villas and all these great outfits and the market in town, and it's just full of all this beautiful scenery.
You know what movie does this perfectly, where it takes those vibes and has the beautiful Italian shots and the beautiful ocean? And do you know where I'm going with this?
I absolutely know where you're
Where
going.
am I going
The
with
Man
this?
from Uncle.
Yes, The Man from Uncle, where they have these. I just thought of the scene where Ilya and what's her name?
You're the expert on that movie. I don't know.
What's the act? Alicia Vikander.
Right.
They're walking through this these ruins at night, and it's just freaking beautiful.
Yeah.
But they're advancing the plot at the same time.
Okay, fair.
And I love that. I love that movie. But I just love that you're still getting these beautiful, immaculate vibes, and it's progressing. To me, and again, I'm comparing a book to a movie, but the book is a lot of and here was the Tower of Pisa.
Right. This is the part that's like she just wanted to go on an Italian excursion.
Yeah. But there was a lot of that throughout the book, even towards the end where things are really hyping up. And then she's explaining canals. And I'm like, and?
I mean, it is but also keep in mind, we're approaching this from a 2020 centric viewpoint. Maybe not everyone was familiar with the ins and outs of different cities and regions in Italy,
That's true. It's like a guidebook.
Yeah, exactly.
/ thriller.
Travel guide / murder mystery.
There you go. So you can go through the tour of the fantastic, the talented Mr. Ripley.
The fantastic Mr. Fox Ripley.
I keep wanting to say the fantastic Mr. Ripley. But the talented Mr. Yeah, it is kind of, I guess it does create that this is a world.
Yeah. And
but for us, it's I know there are canals in Venice.
Yes, of course. But we really are going on a massive tour of Italy between the different versions. I don't know if all of these locales take place in the book.
The answer is yes.
Maybe so. But I mean, so we're starting on the Amalfi Coast, right? There's some different names, by the way, used in each version.
Yeah.
So the series actually uses a Trani, which is a real place. It's
so
right there in the same general area.
Montebello's fake.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a term that's used for Mount Etna.
Is it?
In Sicily?
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what I came across. That would mean beautiful mountain or something, right?
Yeah.
So, that makes sense to me. But yeah. So yeah, but the actual, and I forget where they shot the 99 film, was somewhere it uses that same term, but it I don't know, it doesn't matter. But it's on the Amalfi Coast, like right next to Naples, basically.
Okay.
So that's like the first town, the first city that they go to is Naples.
Mm-hmm.
We end up going to Rome.
Yeah.
We go up to like the Riviera on the border with France.
They go into France.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think they do that in any of the movies,
Yeah.
but that's when they go to, what is it, San Remo?
Yeah.
Which again, I don't remember if that's a real place or not, but it's up there, like kind of right next to Monaco,
Yeah.
And then we go to Rome. We go, we're gallivanting all over Rome. We go to Venice. We go to Sicily at some point. Do they go to Palermo in the book?
Yeah, they go to Greece.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So we're even going further. But
the book actually ends in Greece.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
No, that does make sense.
Yeah. But anyway, to get back on track. So they're in Montebello.
Pause.
Yes.
We didn't finish talking about Marge.
Marge. Yes,
let's talk about Marge.
We got to talk about Marge some more.
Again, characters are crucial here.
At one point in the book, she's described as like looking like a gourd or something like that.
Gourd.
And I forgot to write down the word. It was something like a gourd or something like that. And I was like, it was like toward the end of the book. And I was like, what the heck? So I was like, is she pear-shaped? Is she like, what are we talking
about? Is that like a good
here?
or a bad thing?
That's what I was trying to figure out. So I took it to mean pear-shaped, which if you don't know what pear-shaped is, it just means a woman has wider hips and usually a narrower bust and chest.
Right.
But I was just like really shocked that it was like they were like at the end of the book.
She looks like a gourd.
And Tom is like, she looks like a gourd. I was like, what the heck, man?
Start describing you.
I do not have that body shape. Maybe like a kabocha squash. What kind of gourd is the other question?
Yeah, you gotta be more specific.
Yeah, but
I'm going with butternut squash.
I think butternut squash is.
That's how I picture Marge, like a walking butternut squash
with little legs, a little head on top of the stem. But she's this very artsy. She's a writer. She's writing about Montebello, like a little travel book, which was later turned into The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Right.
But she's writing this nonfiction travel book and she's trying to get it published. And she's like the classic moody writer where she has like sprints and ebbs and flows. Sure. And she's like, I'm in a slump right now. And she's not doing any writing and she's just drinking martinis on the beach. Like she is like the classic, like, writer.
Yeah.
And they keep talking about her underwear.
Do they talk about her underwear a lot?
Not really. So I was on Lit Chart, I think it's called. What's the website? I have it open right here. Yeah, Lit Charts. And one of the themes or like symbols or something is Marge's under things. And they
under things is also a great term.
Yeah, that's even better. And yes, they come up. And yes, they are here and there. Like her bra drying over something.
Oh, sure.
But it's also like they never mentioned Dickie's underwear drying anywhere. So clearly there's this fascination with Marge's underwear.
But there is a fascination with Dickie's clothes.
There is but not his underwear.
Not his underwear.
But the Lit Chart talks about how this is like Tom's hatred for women. I did not get the vibe that he hated women. I got the vibe that he did not like Marge toward the end. And when she turns cold and he feels like she's separating him and Dickie, that's where he's like jealous of her and envious and upset and angry and all these.
I don't know that's like misogyny though. It's
no.
Like, I feel like that's just a representation of his obsession with Dickie.
Yes.
It's not about like him versus women. It's this woman versus Dickie.
Yeah, it's Marge interfering with this obsession he has with Dickie. And it's not because like there are other women in the book who he's fine with. Yeah. You know what I mean? It is I would say male dominated book.
Yeah.
But I never got the vibe that he like hated women. But there are things like her bra drying over something or like her bra strap breaks later in the book or like he thinks about her underwear drying or like hanging over one of his chairs, and he's like, I hate it. But it's not like I hate women. It's like, oh, Marge.
Like,
so.
I can see going that direction with it, and in fact, it would even make sense for some versions of the films. You know, like who Tom is in those films. It might make a little more sense, but no, I definitely don't find it that way.
No, I don't think it's that way at all.
Like the closest to that would maybe be the 1999 version.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because just putting it frankly, it's way more gay than any of the other ones.
All right.
We'll talk more about that too.
Cool.
Like openly so. But then like, yeah, in the series, his disdain for Marge comes more, I think, from like the initial jealousy and then just her constant involvement in his life. Like,
yeah.
you know, there comes a point where he's trying to cut ties, cover things up, and move on with his own life.
Yeah.
And she's kind of the one like straggler on that won't leave him alone. And that to me is where his hatred comes from.
Because she's also honestly a little obsessed with Dickie.
Yeah, of course she is.
Yeah.
I mean, and they even say that, like, especially in the 99 version, they're constantly talking about like, he's like a tractor beam for people.
Yeah.
You know, Dickie is the really like interesting, charismatic one.
Yeah.
Right? That's less so shown in the series, I think, but again, they're just very different people. So
yeah. So since we've been talking about Rome so much, I believe it is on their way to Rome that we meet Freddie.
Mm-hmm.
Freddie, what do they say? Miles instead of Miles. They keep calling him Freddie Miles. Later in the book, who Tom is immediately like, ugh.
Yeah, they hate each other right away.
Yeah, they do not like each other.
It is mutual also.
And I wasn't sure how to picture Freddie other than him being a redhead, and then I saw Philip Seymour Hoffman playing him in
who is definitely my favorite portrayal.
Yeah, and I was like, that's him.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
That's how I picture it. So there, Freddie in these versions is wildly different.
Okay.
Like the biggest difference out of all of these.
Yeah.
And that's mostly due to the series.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, you go ahead and say a little bit more about how you perceive Freddie in the book.
I mean, he honestly shows up and he's like, hi, I'm Freddie. Oh, you should come hang out with us. We're going somewhere in winter. Okay, bye.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't appear for chapters after that.
It's a quick thing. So, like, Tom and Dickie have taken this trip to Rome. Right?
Yeah.
Marge stays behind.
Yeah.
I think in every version or something, she says, like, oh, I'm on a streak with my writing.
Yeah. Something like that.
And then, yeah, so they run into Freddie, who lives in Rome.
Uh-huh.
It's a little different in every version. Like,
yeah.
You know, one time he just passes by them in a cafe.
Yeah.
Another time it seemed like it was, and I think in the 99 version, it seems more like Dickie kind of secretly arranged to meet with him without really telling Tom about it.
Interesting.
Which also starts this other whole jealousy thing with him.
Yeah. No, they like are getting on the bus that Freddie is getting off of.
Oh, okay.
And
so
they're
it's
like,
very by chance.
Yeah, they're like, oh, hi. And then they hold up the bus and Tom is like, we're holding up the bus. Let's go to Rome. I don't like you having other friends.
Right.
And then they go to Rome.
Yeah. So Freddie's like this longtime friend of Dickie's.
Yeah.
That also lives there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, Philip Seymour Hoffman, just, my God, R.I.P. Miss that man so much.
Oh, yeah, he's dead.
He's just electric in every movie that
he
shows up. It doesn't matter how small the part is. Like, dude's just crazy. And this is one of my absolute favorite versions of him. So he's in this version and in Purple Noon. Mm-hmm. He's much more similar.
Freddie
is.
I thought you were talking about Philip Seymour Hoffman.
No. He is kind of this, like, you know, he's like a slightly bigger guy.
Yes.
You know, he's very like free-spirited acting. Uh-huh. He's a little more macho-ish.
Yeah, he's kind of got this like masculine, which becomes a point later on where he's like a little hyper-masculine, a little bit more patriarchy, a little bit like, yeah.
More so than anyone else around.
Yeah.
In the Philip Seymour Hoffman plays it so perfectly because he is kind of this like machismo guy, but he's also like he has some like slightly effeminate traits, and especially when it comes to like fashion and, you know, kind of these status symbols, like he almost goes that into that realm a little bit, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So he has this kind of flair to him, but at the same time being like this womanizing kind of person.
Yeah. I feel like Freddy is explored a lot more in these versions that you're talking about, because I really, like, at the beginning felt like he was like, hi, bye.
Well, I'm so curious. That's why I was curious about that, because that's what he is in Purple Noon, but I don't expect that version to be.
Yeah.
You know, he's very quick, goodbye, hello.
Mm-hmm.
But he's such a major point in both the 99 film and the show.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, they would just squander Philip Seymour Hoffman if they didn't use him as much as they did.
Yeah, for sure.
So it does a lot, I think. But
yeah,
so he's just this very, like, is he at all a womanizer in the books or the book? Can you tell at all?
Not that I could tell.
Okay.
I mean, in fact, he's mentioned as knowing Marge, but most of the relationships you see that he has are men.
Okay.
So I don't remember him being called a womanizer or getting that vibe, but his presence is really quite short-lived.
That's true. That's true.
Literally.
We'll get to that in a sec. But in the in the 99 film, he just has this, like, absolutely ridiculous entrance. So again, they're at a cafe. It seems as though, like, you're seeing it from Tom's perspective, so you don't know for sure. But it seems like as though Freddy has come there on purpose because he knows Dickie's there.
Yeah.
And he pulls up, like, onto the curb in front of this cafe. And this bright red convertible car.
Yeah.
He gets out. He starts, like, yelling when he sees Dickie.
Yeah.
Throwing his arms up.
Yeah.
He walks past this woman, like, looks back at her over his shoulder, and he says, God, don't you just want to fuck every woman you see once?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so wildly different.
Legendary stuff.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, that is nothing like the Freddy in the book. Freddy in the book is much more normal.
Yeah. And in the series, he's just so incredibly different. Not so much in the way he acts, a little bit so. He's so first of all, he's played by Elliot Sumner, who is the child of Sting and someone else.
Okay, I'm going to look up Elliot Sumner while you talk.
But Elliot Sumner identifies as non-binary.
Okay.
And is very much presented that way in the show. Like, Freddy is definitely kind of, like, you know, very effeminate, very, like, posh. You know, he doesn't have that same, you know, he's identifying as male purely as Freddy, of course, but you know, they really lean into the, like, kind of non-binary nature of the actor.
Okay.
And it makes him, like, a really interesting character. Like, he's so different than that kind of, like, monster that Philip Seymour Hoffman is, but he still has some of the touches of class and like, you know, again, just, like, very posh is, like, the best way to describe it. And he's, like, really cunning and just, like, really on top of stuff in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
You know, like, he seems like he's very observant and, like, really paying attention to things.
Okay.
And you never really get any exploration of his actual, like, romantic life in that version.
Yeah.
There's some, like, stuff that Tom sort of makes up about it, but that's about it.
Yeah, kind of like making up the Dickie Marge
romance. So, yeah, just fascinating. Oh, and he's also not American. He's British in the show.
Okay, I think he's American in the book.
I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be.
I mean, a name like Freddie Miles is pretty American.
Miles.
I just love that they keep saying it over and over again like that.
Do the characters get confused by that, by the way?
At first, yeah, they're like, who are you talking about?
It's so funny in the show.
Millais?
Like, you knew Senor Frederick Millais?
Yeah.
Who?
And Tom is like, who the heck are you talking about?
You mean Freddie Miles?
Yeah, and then they keep calling him Millais.
I know, it's so funny.
And it's like, okay, can you, like, now get it right now that we know it's Freddie Miles? It's really, really, really good.
Oh my God.
So this is where Dickie starts to kind of go back to Marge and tire of Tom. and they go to San Remo, and they have one last hurrah.
So what is it that starts to like wear on him about Tom?
I don't honestly know. I think Marge is like kind of getting under his skin, and like you and me, and like we're a pair, and Tom thinks that like maybe he knows he's mooching or thinks he's mooching or is like just getting bored of him or whatever. So he doesn't really. I would say this is a very good limited third book, limited third person, because they really present things from Tom's perspective. And I mean, unfortunately, shortly thereafter, Dickie dies. So we never really know why Dickie gets tired of Tom. But Tom has some theories, which are like boredom or knowing that he's kind of not really trying to get him back. But Tom is like super happy to be his friend at first. And then they get on a boat.
Right. Okay, we'll pause real quick.
Pausing.
So you mentioned earlier that there's this kind of flip-flop between Dickie and Marge and their feelings of Tom and, you know, stuff like this throughout. So these are completely opposite in the 99 version in the series. Basically, in the series, it takes Dickie a little less time, and I think that's somewhat due to his, like, being the perception of him and, like, that kind of more passive nature, just being very chill, where he's kind of just okay with Tom. Like, pretty much straight away. And Marge does not like him. Like, at all.
Like, from the get-go.
She's played by Dakota Fanning, by the way, in the series. I don't think I mentioned that. And by Gwyneth Paltrow in the 99 film.
Interesting.
Your absolute favorite actress.
Yep.
She's such a good Marge, though.
Yeah.
Actually, both of them do a really, really good job. Dickie's kind of, like, forgettable in the series a little bit.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. Like, he's fine, but it just doesn't, you know. But anyway.
Yeah.
Dakota Fanning does a really good job. But yeah, so she's like very put off by Tom at first. Like I said, like Andrew Scott's portrayal, he's kind of this like alien-like figure. Like he does, like he's pretending to be a human being, like, you know?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is just because he's trying to fit into this new world, right? But so that's what kind of changes, is that Dickie starts to sour on him a little bit, and Marge gets nicer towards him. In the 99 film, she's very sweet and warm and welcoming to him straight away. And Dickie's more kind of like, I mean, whatever, he's fine. Like, you know, he's just like kind of unconcerned about it.
Okay.
Right? He's just like, he's around, and then he warms up to him.
Okay.
Through, like you said, like him revealing his father's plan. And all these various adventures that they go on and stuff. But Marge is not, you know, she starts to sour, but it's the important part there is that there's multiple scenes where she brings up in the 99 film how kind of fickle Dickie is.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe sounds a little closer to the character in the book. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I could say he's a little fickle. I mean, if you think about it, he kind of went to Italy and is like, I don't want to do anything. I just want to paint.
Like, he's always moving on to the next thing. Kind of. So, like, in that version, Gwyneth Paltrow as Marge is kind of, like, feeling like her turn is coming for that.
Okay.
And that, you know, so when all this happens, and it's more so that the part you're describing where Dickie and Marge get to be a little closer, and that's what kind of leaves Tom feeling like an outsider.
Yeah.
In the 99 film, it's more him and Freddie that do that.
Okay.
So they start, like, they take this trip to Rome. You know, like I said, it seems as though Dickie has arranged to meet Freddie without Tom knowing. And then he's kind of like, oh, we should go, like, listen to music at this place or whatever. And then he's kind of, like, dismissive towards Tom. Like, oh, well, you want to go do this touristy stuff. I've seen it. You should go by yourself. He's kind of, like, dismissive of him.
Okay.
Right? And so that's where that jealousy kind of comes in that version.
Yeah, so it sounds like they really got their money's worth with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. But it's, like, it's kind of nice. Like, I like Tom and Marge being a little closer in that version. It's kind of sweet. Like, they're almost both outsiders looking in at Dickie.
Yeah. They have that, you know, like, camaraderie.
Right. Who's constantly, like, going back and forth on who he likes more and this and that. Whatever.
Yeah. Nah, once Dickie's dead, Tom is like, I don't like anyone.
But yes, so going back to the story, like, it no matter how it gets to that point, they all come to this point of you're spending too much time together, whether it's Marge saying that to Dickie or Dickie just kind of getting tired of Tom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the film version, Jude Law is like, you're like a leech, you know, he starts kind of going off on him.
Okay.
There's different motivations, but they all lead to the same thing, which is you need to not be here anymore.
Yeah.
Basically.
So they get on the boat, which is sort of their last hurrah. And Dickie actually seems to be enjoying himself.
Yeah.
And
No,
Tom,
because Dickie's he's passive, you know.
Yeah.
He has no emotional investment like Tom does.
yeah, and Tom convinces him to stop the boat. And in the book, he says, like, oh, I'll jump in if you dare me or something like that. And I was like, how old are you, 12? And then he beats Dickie to death with an oar and throws him over the edge tied to a cinder block.
So is this, as far as I understand it in the book, this would be a calculated move, right? This was premeditated.
Not super premeditated.
Really? Okay.
He's like, hey, let's go get on a boat. And then on the boat, he's like, I could become Dickie.
Okay.
Like, it's on the boat that he has all these ideas. And
Well, so you see like little tastes of this leading up to this point, right? Like there's the scene where Tom is trying on Dickie's clothes.
yes,
Right.
which is kind of when Dickie is souring on Tom.
Yeah.
And he decides to go, oh, I'm going to go spend some time with Marge. So Tom goes back to Dickie's house and starts trying on Dickie's clothing.
Yeah.
And Dickie catches him. And that's when he says that Marge says he's queer.
Right.
And Dickie is like, I'm not queer. And he's like really, really defensive about it. Like really defensive about it. But then they kind of warm up again.
Yeah.
They're okay again.
But
and-
it's a major like change,
Yeah.
a turning point.
Yeah, it's
for
a
sure.
pretty big turning point. And also throughout earlier, Tom talks about how Dickie had always been like, here, wear this of mine, wear that of mine,
Mhm.
like dressing him up almost.
Right.
So when he puts on Dickie's clothes and Dickie is like really upset, he's a little bit surprised, but he's also like kind of playing as being Dickie at that time too.
Right. Like this is, you start to see him like kind of doing impressions of him.
Yeah.
Again, the details of this are different in every version. You know, sometimes it's him like pretending he's talking to Marge romantically. Sometimes it's just, you know, in the 99 version, like I said, it's a little more like directly queer coded. So it's,
Yeah.
you know, a little more romantic towards Dickie himself when he dresses up.
Uh-huh.
You know, in other versions, he's just kind of having fun, right?
Yeah.
But either way, so it all like kind of, you start to see him, you know, kind of impersonating. In the 99 version, there's also like Jude Law gets him to do an impression of his father, Herbert.
Oh, that's pretty good.
You know, so you kind of see like how he's good at doing these impressions and things. You know,
Yeah.
things that all, of course, culminate into something later.
Yeah, and there are tastes of that in the book as well, where we see him doing impressions and teasing people. And later on, he does an impression of a different guy and even thinks, ooh, I could take this guy's identity too. That's a bad idea. Like, he's like, I could do this again. That was a really good idea. Oh, no, it was not a good idea.
Right.
But yeah, so he does that. He scuttles the boat, which I guess means sinks a boat.
Okay.
I
Heard that word. I did not know that's what that
I
meant.
didn't really know that's what that meant either, but the boat is sank and he runs off with Dickie's rings and some of his money and his passport and becomes Dickie Greenleaf.
So this is kind of like a somewhat sudden thing, but not like he had it in his mind, in other words, but he didn't necessarily have some elaborate plan to kill Dickie.
Yeah.
Right. That's very similar to the series.
Mhm.
Like he kind of, he's had this like rage building up and jealousy, and you know, eventually you kind of, there's been enough hints that he's like thinking about taking his identity.
Okay.
And so it's just like he just takes the oar or whatever and hits him, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
And the 99 film, like I said, this is where it gets a bit more direct with its, you know, Tom's feelings towards Dickie, wherein he's basically saying, so Dickie has been like flirting with all these other women on these trips that they take.
Okay.
And he kind of complains about Marge a lot.
Okay.
And Tom is taking this as like a sign for him, right?
Okay.
And of course, like it's made very clear that he's somewhat in love with Dickie, at least in this version.
Yeah.
And so when they get out on the boat, this is, Dickie's already been very kind of distant towards him. And then he starts bringing up like, hey, so you're not coming to Freddy's for Christmas with us.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, like, this is going to be our last trip together. We're not going to go do all these other things we talked about.
Yeah.
Basically, I just feel like we're spending too much time together, like all this stuff, right? And then you see this happening in real time where Tom becomes very confused.
Okay.
Because he felt like things were going one way and it turns out they're going a different way. And then Dickie's like, I want to marry Marge. She's the love of my life.
Okay.
And he's like, but you were always like complaining about her and flirting with these other women. And he's like, yeah, but that's just fun. Like, she's the person I'm in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gets very, very angry at this. So it's in this film version, it's very spur of the moment.
Yeah.
Like, it is purely his emotional attachment to Dickie that fills him with rage when he's talking about this and basically being told that he's not wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And he kills him like that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's like not premeditated at all.
Yeah. So like the book is like kind of in the middle.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Just interesting.
Yeah.
The way it goes about it. And that also becomes an important point, like towards the end of the 99 film. It deviates quite a lot, but it harkens back to that, the kind of, mentality behind that scene.
Yeah. Okay. And what about In Purple Noon? I know this one's very different.
So this one's fascinating. So again, it opens like just before all of this, right?
Yeah.
They're on the boat. They spend time, like blah, blah, blah. You go back and forth. Like, it's similar in that he sees Dickie and Marge, which, by the way, his name is Philippe in this version.
Dickie's name?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a French movie.
Yeah.
Which it's interesting because they're like supposed to still be American, but they're speaking French, but they also like lived in France, but they're not from France. I don't know. It's fascinating. But anyway, so this one, they're also very much like a couple already.
Uh-huh.
And, it's the same thing where Marge is really sweet to Tom, but she's like feeling a bit jealous herself. And it's like, you're spending too much time with Tom. And so they end up like getting on this boat together. They're on actually, I think, Dickie's actual boat in this version, not a rental. And they start talking openly about Tom's plan.
Oh. Where
he's like, so how are you going to kill me?
It's just the two of them.
Just the two of them in this. Yeah. So they, like I said, it opens on the boat with all three of them. They go around, they do stuff, it introduces them. They go to Rome, they do all this stuff.
Oh, okay.
And then they come back and they're still just in Montebello or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go out on Dickie's boat and this is what happens. So they're like playing cards together. And Dickie's like, so, how would you go about doing this? How are you going to kill me? When are you going to kill me? I know it's coming. Okay. It's very openly discussed.
That's weird.
And then they like place a wager for something, like a watch or something while they're playing. And then Tom, decides that he doesn't want this thing. Like, he's basically using it as like a token to like get him to leave him alone.
Okay.
It's like, I'm going to like lose on purpose and give you my watch.
Mm-hmm.
And instead Tom just stabs him.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a bizarre scene. Like, it works so well on its own, but this is what I'm talking about where it just like approaching it as an adaptation of this, like, does not work for me at all.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm just not even bringing it up that much, because it's so wildly different. It's kind of like outside the scope of the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I guess it does make sense that maybe it's not an adaptation. It's inspired by the book, but it's not an adaptation.
It's called an adaptation, but yeah, I think inspired by is a much better way to put it.
Yeah. So that's when Tom adopts Dickie's identity. Starts forging signatures, living off the trust fund, cutting people out, sending Marge letters about how he doesn't want to see her, all these kinds of things.
Yeah, he basically pretends to move to Rome as Dickie.
Yeah.
Starts writing letters to all these people.
Yeah.
At various points, again, it's a little different in every version, but Tom, like, he gathers like his passport from the hotel they were staying at in San Remo. He goes, I think, back to Montebello at some point and like gathers some more of his things. He gets his typewriter, which is very important.
Yes.
You know, some of his other bank statements and this and that, and like things to copy a signature from, and various identification papers, like all this stuff to assume his identity.
Yeah, because he's saying that Dickie wants to sell the house in Montebello.
Right. And so he also, does he run into Marge in Montebello?
He does.
Okay.
And she's very curious, but Tom is just like, I don't know. He sent me down here to deal with his affairs. He's in Rome. He doesn't really want to see anyone.
Yeah.
Like making all these excuses.
Yeah, he kind of plays like he's not really sure what's going on and that he's just kind of doing what Dickie asked him to do.
Yeah.
But, you know, makes it clear that he's trying to create some distance from himself with everyone else in his life.
Yes.
And again, like, this is why I feel like some of those earlier choices work so well in the 99 version, because that fickle nature that they drive home so hard, like, really plays into this part.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they're kind of blaming in the book, is that he's sort of like off on another excursion and trying to have a new life and all that kind of stuff. I will say maybe he doesn't appear as fickle earlier on, but there is that, like, you're not surprised that he would do that, but also, you know, it's Tom doing, like, you know, but you're not like, you're like, yeah, it makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
So in Rome, that's when Freddie appears again for the second time.
Yeah. So Tom has gotten an apartment
Yes.
under Dickie's name in Rome.
Yep.
Does he also sort of set up a side life as himself?
Not really.
Okay. Again, they toy with it in different ways in each version. Like the 99 version is probably the most interesting, where he gets the apartment as Dickie. First he just gets a hotel as Dickie.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes and gets a different hotel as Tom. And then he plays phone tag with himself, leaving messages for the other person.
Oh, okay.
To kind of build a paper trail between the two both being there.
Ah.
You know, it's kind of interesting how he goes about it. He's really quite cunning in that version. I really like the details of, like, the con.
Yeah, Tom kind of just disappears.
Yeah.
In the book.
That's more how it is in the series as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just Tom is being Dickie and Tom is nowhere to be seen, if that makes sense.
In the 99 film, he does, like, basically just bleed into Dickie.
Yeah.
At some point, but he tries to set it up as both of them being there.
Yeah. And he really does, like, live as Dickie and adopt his mannerisms. This is where he dyes his hair a little bit lighter. Mm-hmm. He puts on some weight so that he is more, like, larger. Like, Dickie's a little bit heavier than him. So he really does, like, lean into it and just talk about how he's so much happier and more comfortable being Dickie Greenleaf than being Tom Ripley. And
this is where he really becomes confident and, like, changes as a person.
Yeah. And then Freddie shows up.
Totally unannounced.
Tom greets him as Tom, because obviously Freddie would recognize Dickie and Tom. And the woman who owns the building says that Mr. Greenleaf is in, and that there's no
Freddie
one else
comes
there.
in and asks, is he home?
Yeah.
He's gotten his address from somewhere. I forget where exactly, but...
So Freddie goes upstairs, sees Tom, goes back down, talks to the woman, and bolts back upstairs to try to figure out what's going on.
She's very insistent. Like, I just saw him. He just went upstairs. He's definitely there.
Yeah, so you don't really hear the conversation. You just hear his feet, like, coming back up and that they had talked.
Because in every film version, he goes to the top of the staircase and listens in on their conversation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
For the perspectives.
Yeah. And basically immediately when Freddie walks in the door, he slams a glass ashtray on his head and beats him to death.
Okay, so he uses an ashtray.
Yes.
Okay. Good to know.
Yes.
Same in the series. He uses a bust in the 99 film.
Yeah.
Which I read something, I didn't write it down, but it has some deeper meaning to homosexuality.
Oh, okay.
The bust of the person that he used, you know, was like a poet or something that was thought to be gay.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And just to say, like, during this, again, different in every version, but, like, Freddie, when he visits him, starts to notice things, like, he comments on the fact that he's wearing Dickie's clothes.
Yeah.
Especially his shoes or something that he pays especially close attention
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
In the Philip Seymour Hoffman, he notices in that version, like, he makes a good quote I didn't write down, but he's looking around and kind of judging all of the stuff that Tom has bought.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he's trying to claim this is Dickie's apartment. And he's like, Dickie would never buy any of this stuff. It's gauche and ugly and terrible.
Oh, wow.
And then he's like, in fact, the only thing that looks like Dickie in this apartment is you.
Oh, wow.
It's a great line.
That's a really good line, yeah. Yeah, it seems like Freddie is picking up on what's going on, or he thinks that they're gay and they're together.
Right, yeah. And that's more where the series takes it.
Yeah.
Is that he thinks that they're hiding a relationship.
Yeah. A lot of the other characters think that they're hiding a relationship too.
That becomes a big thing for Marge later too.
Yeah.
That she assumes that they're in love and are hiding it.
Yeah, exactly. So with Freddie dead, Tom, as Dickie, attempts to hide the murder by waiting until evening, pretending they got drunk, taking the body out and hiding it and making it seem like he was killed in a robbery gone wrong.
Right. Yeah, so he kind of, takes his body outside, finds Freddy's car, puts him in it, drives him out to a remote location, makes it sort of look like a robbery. He doesn't do a very good job at it, though.
Yeah. He hides it behind a grave or something like that. It's
really?
Quite apropos.
Yeah, it's a little different in each version.
Appropriate, yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like it's different in in Purple Noon. Actually, it's a really extended scene compared to most. Like Freddy spends more time on screen as a corpse in that film than he does alive.
That honestly feels like it's appropriate with the book.
Really?
Yeah, because he's like dragging him around. He's driving through Italy. Again,
right.
He's like, oh, look, the Tower of Pisa. He's not actually looking at the Tower of Pisa, but...
Yeah, they go on a whole adventure. Like, this is like Weekend at Bernie's 3,
Yeah.
Just me and my bud, Freddy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he kind of pretends like when he's loading him in the car that he's like drunk and just trying to help him, But yeah, so he like in different versions he either like carries him, or there's a whole thing about the elevator being broken in the series, which like really ties into this scene. A lot of these details don't really matter, but they're really interesting. Like that each version really takes these little details and goes different ways with them.
Yeah.
And in fact, the one thing of note in the series that deals with this scene in particular is that he really like roughs up Freddy's body when he's trying to get rid of it.
Okay.
So he like drags him down because again the elevator is broken.
Yeah.
It's been like breaking every other day since he moved in.
That's funny.
That's one thing the series does really well, is it like foreshadows things really, really well. I'll talk more about that later, like in summary, but so it, he like realizes the elevator's broken, has to like pull him out halfway on one of the levels,
Yeah.
because the elevator stopped.
That's
and then
funny.
he basically drags him by his feet with his head bumping down each stair, and so this whole show, I don't think I even mentioned, is in black and white.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of this very like neo-noir style, very cool.
Yeah.
The only thing in color in the entire 8 episodes is at the end of episode 5, he has dragged Freddy's body out, and you see that the cat owned by the landlady in the building has tracked some of Freddy's blood on the stairs around the building.
Wow.
And it's shown in red. And that's the only thing in color in the whole series.
That kind of makes sense because this is a huge turning point for the story.
Yeah. Really cool touch.
Where thus begins the, as Wikipedia describes it, cat and mouse game with the Italian police.
It's constantly used, that phrase, for this.
Yeah.
Every synopsis of every film.
I mean, it's the best way to describe it.
That's exactly what it is.
This is really a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of talking, where basically Tom as Dickie is trying to cover up one thing and pretend he's Dickie and trying to say like, yes, Freddie and I were together. The boat turns up. And they're trying to figure out if Tom is dead.
Right. So it's important to say he's talking to the police and this inspector. What's the inspector's name in the book?
Oh, I actually don't remember.
Ravini in the series.
Let's go with Ravini.
Let's say Ravini. He's like Riccaboni or something in the movie.
Roverini, yeah.
Roverini. Okay, so they're completely different in every...
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's kind of this, like, big-time Rome detective,
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely shown in the show as being, like, kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
In terms of the police force.
Yeah, he's also, Tom kind of talks about him like he's an idiot. And he's like, yeah, I'm way better than this. I can con him. But they have some suspects for Freddy's murder. They turn out to be nothing. They're really on this wild goose chase. Mm-hmm. And no one is realizing that the answer is right in front of them.
Right. They're just, it's like one step removed too far for them.
And it just like, as Tom, he writes to Herbert Greenleaf saying he thinks Dickie died by suicide.
Because he sends like a letter saying that he's like, he can't do this anymore and stuff. Like he sends one to his parents, he sends one to Marge,
Yeah.
Kind of implying that he's coming to like the end of his ability to live.
Yeah. So there's all this running around. And finally, after all of this investigation, which is done really well, it's just a lot of talking.
Yeah, we don't need to go into all the details, but it really is like great sequence through and through in every version.
Tom realizes that to fix everything, he has to reassume the identity of Tom Ripley and make people believe that Tom Ripley is still alive.
Because the problem is he's trying to straddle. The inspector knows him as Dickie. Marge knows him as Tom. They're crossing paths sometimes.
Yes.
He has like his house, but then he's also trying, so he's like, there's too many interweaving things. So yeah, he's finally like, there's only one way to deal with this, to make Dickie disappear.
Yeah.
And bring Tom back.
Yeah. And as we said, you said that he's like Tom and Dickie were calling each other in the 99 movie. In the book, Tom disappears.
Right.
So they genuinely think he's dead.
Right. So what ends up happening is instead of, the answer that's true, the inspector starts to be like, and it's almost funny because that means that Tom gets to seem guilty when he's talking to the police because he's not Tom.
Yeah.
Right. So he's slowly, whether on purpose or by accident, building this image of Dickie.
Yeah.
As this kind of untrustworthy, slimy guy.
Yeah.
That killed his friend and is running away and possibly killed Tom because he's missing.
Yeah.
So instead of the real answer, they assume it's the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Where Dickie has killed Tom in San Remo.
Yeah.
And is hiding, and that's why he's run away.
Yeah. So to solve all of this, we go to beautiful Venice.
Beautiful.
We hear about all the beautiful canals, and Tom buys.
Tell me about the canals.
They're beautiful.
Are they beautiful?
They're mossy.
How do they work?
I don't know. But Tom buys a house as Tom Ripley and puts on horned rim glasses. And
that is his final form.
And he starts communicating with people as Tom Ripley.
Right.
And Marge comes, hangs her underwear on his thing, and he doesn't like it.
And he kind of is like feigning like, oh, well, I heard now in the papers that I was thought missing,
Yes.
But I've just been traveling around and now I'm here to like prove I'm not missing.
Yeah. And he in Venice, he talks to actually one of the policemen he recognizes, but it turns out not to matter. But he talks to some police there and they're different. So he's fine. They don't recognize him as Dickie. And he's just like, well, I'll just hang out in Venice.
I do want to note one very interesting difference between the 99 film and the show is that, so in the book, you're saying that the inspector changes?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what happens in the 99 version.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, they get like frustrated with the case kind of not going anywhere, so they reassign.
Yeah.
And then that's ultimately the person that comes to visit Tom in Venice. So that's how he's able to get away with not being recognized. And it's the same person in the show. And so he like does this whole elaborate thing of like turning down all the lights, making sure the chairs are far enough apart in his living room where they're going to be sitting.
Yeah.
Like putting on a disguise a little bit.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
So he kind of does that in the book when he first comes out as Tom. He does sort of like make sure the lights are a certain way, but instead of the Roman detective coming, he gets a Venetian detective.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what happens.
Okay.
And they talk to him about it, and he has his passport. He's hidden Dickie's passport, and he still has Dickie's typewriter and stuff. But generally, he has things which are not like hugely suspicious, and he's able to be like, "Yeah, I'm just living off of some money I came into, and I'm just gonna wait for it to burn up," which is what he tells Marge, and then I'm gonna go back to the U.S.
She's like shocked by this.
Yeah,
she's like the only one that's seen him from start to finish.
Yeah,
and so she arrives in this like elaborate house and is like, "What the hell's going on here? This is not the Tom Ripley I know."
Yeah.
And I think in the show he says that he like came into some money from a dying aunt or something.
I can't remember.
She makes a joke about like, would you have a rich aunt die? And he's like, well, yes, actually, we were very close and it was very tragic.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was just kidding.
That's good. That's when I keep wanting to call him Dr. Greenleaf for some reason. Herbert Greenleaf.
Dr. Greenleaf.
Hires a private detective and comes out to Italy himself.
Right.
Tom once again has to play with his stories. Again, talks about how he thinks Dickie is dead. I'm having such a hard time with these names right now. And all of this is going pretty smoothly, but no one really thinks Dickie is dead. Everyone's like, he wouldn't.
Well, the thing that a lot of them keep getting stuck on is the fact that Tom had pulled out basically the rest of Dickie's money.
Yeah.
That's how he's, of course, paying for this lifestyle
now.
But so that's like the one catch point that everyone's stuck on, is that everything else makes sense that he would have kind of just like left his life behind and either run away or, decided to kill himself.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, especially Marge is stuck on, of why would he pull out this money?
Yeah.
If he was going to kill himself.
Yeah. There's also this weird thing about a signature forgery going on.
Right, with the bank.
Yeah, and how people think his signature is forged, but other people don't think it's forged, which honestly kind of amounts to nothing, but it's another good suspenseful through line that goes on in this novel.
Right,
and
it's just, this is where everything is like amped to 11, right? Like, Tom is now having to deal with like 18 different strands of this thing coming to a head.
Yeah. So even the private detective questions him. And he's like, I think he died. And then it comes out. Marge breaks her bra strap and searches Tom's room for some needle and thread rather than just asking like a normal person. And she finds Dickie's rings.
Right.
And as she's talking to Tom, like, why do you have these rings? What's going on? He thinks about murdering her with the heel of his shoe.
Which, again, at this point, he's like so done with her.
Yeah.
Like, definitely, like, get out of my life, leave me alone.
Yep.
She, at this point, at least in the show, she's very friendly towards him again.
Yes.
She's kind of come back and, feels like they're on the same team of like, woe is me, what happened to Dickie? And so he's hating that at the same time, right? That, like, he doesn't want to be friendly with her.
Yeah.
There's even like a possibility that she's become romantically interested in him.
Okay.
And he's like, no,
I'm
good.
I would almost say he kind of like blames her for Dickie's death in a way. Like,
right, because he's wrestling with all his own guilt throughout.
Yeah. And
not to say that he's just like totally, machine-like going through this. He definitely has some feelings about it.
And how like he had to, quote unquote, kill Dickie because Marge was pulling them apart. So he I feel like he just never forgave her for that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So he's like really doesn't want her in his house, even though he invites her to stay the night and like.
Because he has to keep up appearances too.
Yes.
So he's trying to straddle this line.
Yes. And so when she finds the rings, he's like, she's going to figure it out. But she takes like a completely wrong turn and goes, if he gave you these rings, he must have taken his life.
Right.
He must have been planning to take his life. And then they show the rings to Herbert Greenleaf and they explain everything. And everyone seems to accept that Dickie Greenleaf has taken his own life.
Yep. Yeah, so it's roughly the same in the series.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, there's a really particular moment where she, you know, his house there in Venice like opens up onto a canal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they come back one night and she's standing out there. There's a whole lot of reason why this happens, but she's standing out there right next to the canal and he's like staring at her and he's like this close to pushing her in the canal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in the show, it shows the whole scene of him doing it and everything. And then of course flashes back.
Yeah.
And it's like that one decision is what lets him get away with it.
Yeah.
If he had killed her there, he would have been fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically.
And that, I think, shows this really big, like, it's not just that he's, like, gotten into this lifestyle. It's not just that he's, like, changed in those ways and become higher class or, like, learned how to fit in. Like, his thought process and controlling his emotions has actually changed.
Yeah.
Throughout this.
Yeah. Yeah. He's not just wildly murdering people anymore.
Right.
So they accept that Dickie has killed himself. And then at the end of the book, we have a huge time jump of like months where for the first time in the book, they actually mention a year where they talk about something happening in the 1920s. And this actually really drove me insane is that every letter is 19. Like they don't give it a year. And I really wish they had just said 1955 or something.
Okay.
Because it's clearly at a time and there's like a time.
Yeah.
And then later in the book, they mention a year.
Okay.
So it's like, why aren't you mentioning years throughout? Why are all these letters just 19 blank?
Huh.
Which I really didn't like.
That's interesting.
I really like, we get it. It's contemporaneous. Just say that.
Right.
It's okay if it says 1955 and people are reading it in 1956. Like it doesn't, it's not going to age.
No,
like
it doesn't matter.
The 80s are going to be different. It's okay. But they, through some extra, his final con, let's say, Tom has written a will.
Okay.
Which happens actually much earlier, on Dickie's typewriter,
Right.
which has a very distinct type
Yes.
because it needs to be repaired.
The letter E is slightly raised.
They don't even mention that in the book. They're just like, it's clearly Dickie's typewriter that has all these faults.
Yeah.
They don't even say what it is.
I mean, that's like a key thing for many of the letters and stuff that he wrote.
Yeah.
Oh, this couldn't have been faked because it was clearly written on Dickie's typewriter.
Exactly. He like throws the typewriter into the canal. And these months later, he says, look, I found this will, and sends it to Herbert Greenleaf. And he's like, this could ruin everything. And it doesn't. And he gets to Greece and he sees police and he's like, I'm just going to calmly let them take me away. And they don't arrest him.
Right.
And one of the final lines of the book is basically this paranoia of like, will he feel like there's a policeman on every corner watching him?
Right. And that's, like I said, that was like the big thing that stuck with me in the series. And that's why I think, just to put it straight out there, it's definitely the best adaptation from what you've described.
Yeah.
In terms of like being one-to-one with the book and still being effective as a visual medium.
Yeah.
Because that is what is shown in that version that's not shown in any of the other ones.
Okay.
He has guilt. He's racked by guilt in the other versions, but it takes a very different form.
Yeah.
You know, so in this one, again, he is this like very cold, distant alien kind of person. And yeah, he like learns how to charm himself to certain people throughout the course of the story. But like you envision him as this like just kind of cunning person that doesn't really hold a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
You know, throughout this performance by Andrew Scott. But you still see him. There's multiple, not just in the end, but throughout times, especially from where he kills Freddy on. There's multiple scenes of him like thinking he sees Dickie walking down the street, or like, you know, feeling like he's having a fake conversation with one of them about someone else, or like trying to talk through his guilt with one of the people he killed. Like there's scenes like that. And then the same thing, like there's multiple times where he comes across police Or, you know, he goes to withdraw money at the bank and they have to go talk to the bank director, and he gets on the phone and he starts to freak out.
Yeah.
You know, because he's just constantly paranoid. This is where I get caught.
Yeah, I would say the book is a lot more paranoia over guilt.
Right. That's what I'm saying, is that it's more guilt in the other versions.
Yeah.
It's more paranoia but it's from a place of guilt.
Yeah.
That's why he feels that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that deep down he feels guilty, even though in the front of his mind he's not.
Yeah.
You know, he feels like he just did what he needed to do, or it was some sort of justice, or like a life he deserved and Dickie didn't, or like whatever way you want to say that he might have approached it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is where the book ends in Greece. He gets off the boat, sees the police.
Right.
And that's where it's like very little takes place in Greece, but that's where it is.
Which
in Greece.
that to me would imply that he gets away.
Yeah. I mean,
version, right?
One thing that ruined it for me was knowing it's a series.
That's true.
If you know there are 5 more books, you know he doesn't spend 20 years in prison.
Right. Which when I first watched the movie, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea it was a series.
Yeah.
So it still helped, but...
Yeah, so I wish I hadn't known it was a series going into it, because I kept being like, well, he's going to get away with it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the how is still very intriguing.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I can definitely understand that. So definitely some like very noteworthy differences when it comes to the ending.
Yes.
So again, the series, like, I feel like I haven't even touched on it a whole lot throughout the conversation outside of the characters, because it just fits so closely with what you're describing.
Okay.
Like, really, the story beats are... I'm sure that some of the details that we skipped over about, like, how he got through this one particular situation or how this conversation went or something, you know, there those differences there. But generally, the story beats just, like, hit boom, boom, boom.
Mm-hmm.
But it does have a slightly different ending. It's still a bit ambiguous, but it's not quite the same. So you get to the same point where everyone's kind of satisfied, right?
Yeah. They
think that Dickie has killed himself. Mr. Greenleaf agrees. The PI agrees. You know, Tom does, towards the end, kind of solidify it by saying that he believed that Dickie was in love with him.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of like what finally, you know, makes the PI go along with it, because he still felt like there was like something missing. And that's kind of the piece that like ties it together for him.
Okay.
And then there were just like some other letters he sent like to his landlady in Rome and this and that kind of just, it ties it all together with people. But the interesting things that happen in the very, very last scene is that Marge has finally finished her book.
Yeah, she finishes her book is almost finished.
Okay. So she's talked to this Inspector Ravini over and over again. And again, remember, he stayed as the inspector throughout this whole thing.
Yeah.
So he also becomes satisfied that this is what happened, right?
Yes.
In fact, he believed that Dickie had killed himself long before Marge and his father and all these people did himself. But so he had asked, because again, they lived in a place called Atrani in this version, not Montebello, same area. But so the inspector keys in on that when he first talks to Marge, because he had like a family member that lived there, grew up there. So he was very familiar with the place. So he was like, oh, so you're writing this book about Atrani. Please send it to me when you finish. So she sends it, and it's dedicated to Dickie. Okay. And it has a picture of Dickie in it.
Ooh.
And so the very last scene of the series is him seeing this and realizing that Dickie is not who he thought he was.
Oh, wow.
And that's where it ends. And so it's sort of tricky, because it's like implied that, okay, that means Tom is found out, but it's almost like too late for anyone to do anything about it. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting mix of the like, someone has to find one of these loose ends somewhere, but he still gets away with it. Yeah. That's kind of how I view that one.
Yeah. There's a cool scene in the book where they find Dickie Greenleaf's belongings in an American Express, which is, I guess, it's like a postal exchange / storage place.
Yeah.
Where you can like send things and have things stored. And so Tom like wraps up all his paintings and puts them in there when he's going back to being Tom. And they find it and they test it for fingerprints. And he's like, oh, I'm screwed, but they compare it to the fingerprints in the
the
hotel
apartment.
or the apartment. Yeah. And they're the same.
Yes.
And I thought that was really cool that he was like, oh my gosh, I got away with it because they thought Dickie lived in the apartment.
They do that in one of the versions. I forget which one. It's not quite the same. It's like, oh, the fingerprints in Freddy's car or something are the same. But yes, so his like assumption of being Dickie at that point is what lets him get away with it.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's really, really fun.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of little touches like that that are really good.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
And then the biggest difference being in Purple Noon, it ends very differently. So a lot of it does start to kind of follow the story, like after we get a little ways in. But in that version, he is kind of going on his way. He like ends up selling Dickie's boat like at the very end with the blessing of Mr. Greenleaf and stuff. But as they are going to, in this version, again, he killed Dickie on his own boat, right?
Yeah.
He tied the body to an anchor under the boat.
Oh.
There was like a whole thing of like it got stuck. He didn't necessarily mean to.
Okay.
But they go to sell the boat and pull up his body with him.
Oh.
And that's when it ends. And Tom is still actively involved at this point.
Okay.
So it's very much implied that he gets caught in this version.
Interesting.
Which Patricia Highsmith hated.
I mean, yeah, she wrote 4 more books.
Yeah. Which it's not like it matters for this. Like any of these were kind of approached to be, you know, kind of a one-off thing.
Mm-hmm.
But she described it as a terrible concession to so-called public morality.
Interesting.
So she was like, you guys are too pussy to just let him get away with it. You have to make him get caught and everyone feel like it's all tied up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I really like her ending where it's like it is tied up, but there's still that sense of like unease.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought her ending was like that's the perfect way to do it. It's like, oh, it's done, but it's never done.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole part of the 1999 film that I've been skipping.
Okay, let's talk about it.
There are 2 characters in this movie that do not exist in any other version.
Okay.
Okay, so these 2 characters are interspersed throughout this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it only really becomes like a big deal towards the end.
Yeah.
So one of the characters is played by Cate Blanchett.
Oh my gosh. I saw her and I was like, what the heck is her name?
So she is playing someone named Meredith Logue.
Okay.
Who is also like the daughter of they're like a textile company family or something.
Okay.
So she runs into Tom while they're traveling, like at a train station or a boat, ferry or something. And they kind of connect because she's like a little more wary about traveling in Italy and doesn't know Italian as well, or this or that, whatever. Anyway, she's happy to see another American. Mm-hmm. And specifically happy to see another American that's in her same, status.
Mm-hmm. Tax bracket.
Right. Because he is, of course, pretending to be Dickie.
Okay.
And in fact, I believe the first time he introduces himself, he hasn't even killed Dickie yet.
Interesting.
I could be wrong about that, but it's pretty close anyway. So they have like this back and forth thing where they're like kind of dating. Sort of, like she's very much in love with him, but he's like, well, whatever, because he's in love with Dickie.
Yeah.
And she has a friend named Peter, who's played by Jack Davenport.
Who is in Coupling.
Sure. Never seen it. I'm familiar with him as an actor. So yes, he is this other character named Peter. They're friends, so Tom gets introduced to Peter through Meredith, right?
Okay.
Eventually, they end up hitting it off a bit more because, again, Tom is basically openly gay in this version.
Yeah.
He makes it very clear his feelings towards Dickie. And then after all of that happens, so he's, when he kills Dickie, it's this very painful moment for him because he's essentially just killed the person he's in love with.
Yeah.
Right, in a fit of rage and jealousy.
Yeah.
So there's this whole back and forth again of, Meredith knows Marge and knows Dickie, but never has seen them together. So she didn't actually know what Dickie looked like. And so they run into each other and there's all these like back and forth. It plays a lot with this. It adds many more elements of this like Tom trying to balance being both people in front of the right people.
Where he's living a double life.
Right. So it adds a lot of intrigue when it comes to that. I think that these characters are actually quite cool in that way. But basically, so it really comes to a head at the end. So again, everyone's kind of gotten away with things. I do want to touch on one other thing with Marge there. But essentially how it ends is that he and Peter basically start dating. And they go on this cruise together. And this is kind of like, Tom is feeling like everything's finally behind him, whatever. But Meredith is also on the boat. So, of course, Peter knows him as Tom. And she knows him as Dickie.
Ah.
And I think he knew that, like I said, him and Meredith, or Peter and Meredith had kind of been friends, but they had grown apart since then. She didn't want to be around him anymore because she was like in love with him and he spurned her, all this stuff. So basically he catches up with her on the boat.
Yeah.
Kind of like teases her because he's not, I think, sure how to go about this situation just yet.
Yeah.
So he kind of like, drops a little hook for her, kisses her.
Okay.
And Peter sees it.
Ah.
And so he kind of confronts him when he gets back. And Peter starts to piece together some things that don't make sense to him.
Interesting.
Starts kind of questioning things. And so there's this moment where Tom, he's like these big emotional outbursts in this version.
Okay.
Matt Damon does. He's, clearly very haunted by things. He even makes all these references to his like former life, where he like had a rough time growing up and stuff. Like none of this is shown, but it's talked about in these monologues he gives. But anyway, so he starts doing one of these and then like crying and then going to ask Peter to hold him. And then he starts to strangle him to death.
Oh, okay.
So he kills one more person.
Wow.
At the very end.
Yeah.
And that's basically exactly how it ends, is that scene. So yeah, you basically hear the sounds of Peter choking as it fades out.
Wow.
And that was how he dealt with it. So it's very ambiguous in terms of what happens. Like, I mean, how does he get rid of this body? Like, you have no idea what happens at this point.
Yeah.
It's a bit more like implied that maybe he gets caught in this version.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I meant by it kind of, he's like basically sobbing while he's doing this. Because again, he's fallen very much in love with this person.
Yeah.
So both instances of that, Freddy's the outlier there.
Yeah,
he still hated Freddy in this version, but he's basically had to kill two people that he loved in these very dramatic fashions.
Mm-hmm.
In a way to protect himself. So
yeah,
there's a nice kind of comparison there.
Mm-hmm.
He also says the best like summarization line of any of these versions to Peter during that last little monologue. He essentially finally like confesses to him what he's done because he knows he can't get away with it.
Yeah.
And so he says, I always thought it would be better to be a fake somebody than a real nobody.
Oh.
It's my absolute favorite line in any of these.
That's a really good line.
It's just a perfect summation of the story.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the other point that's important for this ending is that Marge in this 99 version has completely soured on him.
Yeah.
She is until the end still not convinced. She, in fact, by the end of this movie, is 100% convinced of the truth.
Okay.
Which is that Tom has assumed Dickie's life, that he killed him, and has been lying to all of them.
Okay, that's quite a different ending.
This is where that theme of misogyny might come in a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Because essentially, he throughout some of these letters of Tom writing as Dickie to his parents,
mm-hmm.
the PI and Herbert both think that Marge does not understand that she was being cast aside by Dickie, which of course we know is not the truth.
Yeah.
But they are only talking about her as she is like some hysterical spurned lover that cannot be trusted.
Yeah.
And of course she's spot on the money. She knows exactly what happened.
Yeah.
but they're totally dismissing it and telling her to stop being fucking crazy, basically.
Wow.
So she's totally ignored, and that's how he gets away with that.
Wow.
Which is a really interesting touch, I think.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
That is. I think I like the book's ending more, but
Sure.
I do think those are good endings and very interesting ways to go about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially if you're not planning on making a series, they kind of tie up in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it was a really interesting touch to add to the movie. You know, it hits so many of the same beats, but it really changes some interesting parts.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So is there anything else you want to touch on, Alan?
I mean, I think we touched on most of it. Like, we could talk a little bit more about some of these themes that we didn't fully get into. You know, you had mentioned earlier that, you know, we see that Tom becomes better at being Dickie than Dickie ever was. You know?
Yeah.
And Tom even starts to, especially in these film versions, he starts to kind of retroactively judge Dickie.
Yeah.
In that way, where he's like, oh, he's kind of like a shitty artist, or like,
Oh, he's like, from the moment he sees Dickie's art, he's like, this is shit.
Right?
Yeah.
Most people seem to feel that way.
Yeah.
You know? But it's just like, you know, it's almost this thing of like, well, I deserve it more because I'm a better person than him.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a really interesting thing of like kind of the lies that we tell ourselves sometimes, you know?
Yeah, and he's definitely lying to himself.
Like to justify our actions. And
yeah.
stuff, so.
Yeah.
And there's this really interesting point in the movie. But so Tom keeps telling all these people about how Dickie has been studying with this artist, DiMassimo.
Yeah.
Is that in the book?
Yeah, that's in the book. And they can never find DiMassimo.
No one knows who he is, but he's still like, there's all these scenes of him telling people in these like, you know, big wealthy to-do parties. And some people are like, oh yeah, of course, DiMassimo. You know, and that's great. Is like such a great highlight of how these people like, you know, it's all fake. It's all performative, right? Like, and he uses that to his advantage in this case, you know, it's just really, really interesting.
Yep.
And so he's like, you know, able to imitate because everyone else is kind of imitating at the same time, even though they're born into that world. You know, they can get away with it naturally that way.
Yeah.
But they're not really any more like real than he is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Where does like art itself fit in with the book? Because it's presented so differently in every film version. You know, it's like, obviously you're dealing with artists. Like Dickie fancies himself an artist, even if his paintings are shit.
Honestly, there's like this sense of, I guess it follows Tom going from Tom to fake Dickie to better fake Dickie, where he starts to surround himself with more lavish things, and he paints, and he can paint like Dickie. He's like that impressive of a con man, but he starts like surrounding himself with these lavish art and beautiful art and buying art. The more he becomes and then improves upon Dickie. But I wouldn't say it's huge, but it definitely has a presence there.
Okay. You know, this is something I had talked to you about previously, just because it's like really interesting to me, is that like, I think that Tom views his conning as an art in itself.
Yeah, we did talk about that briefly. Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of like an interesting comparison, where he ends up being so much better, not just at being Dickie, but like
an artist.
At an artist. Of like doing his art.
Well, it's funny because he's like, becomes a better painter than Dickie. He becomes a better Dickie than Dickie. And then he's also a better con artist.
Yeah.
So like you said, his own art, he becomes even better at.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. No, I love that. And it, kind of interesting. There was like a kind of a slate of films around that same time and a little later, that kind of share that conning as an art form kind of thing. There was like Catch Me If You Can, which was either right before or right after this film.
Okay.
Which is, again, is about, it's played by Leo DiCaprio, who also was in talks to play, instead of Matt Damon, Tom Ripley. But same kind of cat and mouse game of like stealing identities and stuff, which was interesting. And then like, you know, it made me think of like the Ocean's films a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
You know? It's like this very like kind of cool, like, again, like, they're committing a crime, but you're rooting for it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and again, that maybe didn't work for you in the book form, but like, it definitely works for me in the movie.
Okay.
Because I think that specifically the 99 film is like really leaning into that aspect of like making it an art form.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes you want to like root for it because it's cool. You know?
Yeah.
It just is really, really cool.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, yeah, I think that's about it. Like I said, the 99 version definitely goes, you know, I think it's in the book, it's clearly a piece of it that there's like some sort of homoeroticism going on, you know?
Yeah.
It's certainly an aspect in Purple Noon.
Yeah.
I mean, not just the fact that there's two hot dudes on a boat, like that definitely plays into it. The fact that no person, gay, straight, or otherwise, can, you know, resist the charms of Alain Delon. But it's still like someone implied, like, even that. So it's funny because Tom is trying to pretend as though he knew Dickie/Philippe from even longer before. Like, I think he makes up a story about being at his 12th birthday party.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
But then he, even though it's all made up, he like talks about their childhood all as though he's had a crush on him their entire life. It's really interesting.
That is really interesting.
So it's like definitely found there. But again, it's like up front and center in the 99 version. And then it's like toyed with a little bit in the series, but not fully explored.
Yeah, it seems like the movies really took those, like, are they queer? Are they not? And like put it to the front.
Mm-hmm.
And the book has it in there and it doesn't feel hidden by any means, but it's not necessarily as in your face as the movies.
Right.
But I would say that I suspect that Dickie and Tom did have some kind of relationship that was budding, and Dickie was afraid.
Right.
And Marge only by accusing Tom of being queer and by kind of wedging herself in between and bringing that, you know, she kind of prevented their relationship from blossoming.
Mm.
So it could have been a very different book if
True.
Marge just kicked it to the curb.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's it really plays with desire in a fun way. I like it a lot.
Absolutely.
And then that's, like I said, the 99 one is just such like a bisexual paradise. You know?
Yeah.
It comparing these two movies is not like completely out of pocket. I've definitely heard it before, but I would say that the 99 Mr. Ripley walked so that Call Me by Your Name could run.
Interesting.
Because you're getting the exact same like sun-drenched Italian villas and shirtless men in short shorts and this and that, whatever, you know.
Interesting.
Like, I definitely feel like Luca Guadagnino, not just in that movie, but in a bunch of his movies, like pulled some stuff from this movie.
Yeah, okay. All right. Interesting.
Pretty cool.
Wow. Well, okay. So what do we think, Alan? Is the book better than the movie?
I don't know. I'm like really curious to read this book now.
I know. I'm really torn.
I mean, I really, so again, like my experience with this is that I saw the 1999 film quite a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Watched it again earlier this year and then watched it again in preparation for this. So I've seen it quite a few times at this point.
Yeah.
It was my first introduction to it. And I love so much about it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it makes a lot of these changes that I think maybe don't necessarily make it the best adaptation.
Yeah.
That's ultimately, you know, what we're trying to decide here.
Yeah.
But, you know, as we've stated in many past conversations, like making a one-to-one adaptation doesn't necessarily make
a good movie.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes changes are necessary to make a good screen adaptation.
Yeah.
I think I would still fall on that the series does it best.
Okay.
It gives time for things to breathe.
Yeah.
Things don't feel too rushed in the movie, but it just has to ultimately cut some scenes that I think add a lot.
Yeah.
Especially to the characters. So when you talk about adaptation and the way that you've described the book and how the characters are, I feel like that portrayal is the best.
Okay.
And I love the style in it. Like I said, this kind of black and white neo-noir feel. You know, it has good music. The framing of the camera is just absolutely gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it really, again, at times it can feel like a little hand-holdy if you think about it too much, but ultimately it's just like really aesthetically pleasing.
Okay.
because it really is like focused on these little objects, you know, like it shows you the ashtray that he kills Freddy with before he does it.
Yeah.
And it really makes a point of it, and how like it shows him buying it and it shows him placing it. And it,
Oh, wow.
you know, it shows that it's like this really nice ashtray that's, you know, really well constructed and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
And there's 1,000 examples of that throughout the show.
Okay.
So I like the way that it like, you know, shows you things ahead of time, like foreshadows it.
Yeah, I feel like the book actually a lot of times kind of is like telling you something and it's like, oh, and by the way, all of this stuff happened too. And it's like, why didn't you tell me before?
Oh, interesting.
So it actually loses that foreshadowing. So I was about to say, it sounds like we're at a loss for which is better, but based on that foreshadowing alone and the fact that the book, I feel, gets more caught up in let's explore Italy than let me foreshadow what's happening, maybe we give it to the series.
Maybe so.
Maybe we give it to Matt Lucas.
Yeah, because again, it's just like a great adaptation, but it like maybe the medium just works better for that.
Yeah.
Especially given the style that the series has.
Yeah.
So I think that would probably be where I would land
Okay.
from what I get. But
It seems fair.
the 99 film, it just holds such a special place in my heart.
I want to say this is probably because usually when we talk about something or even before we sit down, I have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I go, this book, like The Shining, the movie's better.
Yeah.
You know, like I have an idea of where my heart is, and it doesn't usually shift that much. And I think this is one of those instances where you cannot go wrong.
Yeah.
You read the book, you watch the movies, whatever is your preferred medium and your preferred length or whatever, you're going to get a similar story with some tweaks, you know, here and there. But the book wasn't bad. For all of my little gripes about it, it wasn't a bad book. It just didn't inspire me. It didn't really move me like how I really want a book to. But it was interesting. And I would say it wasn't, I'm not the audience for it. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Is that if you are intrigued by this premise, read it.
Yeah.
Absolutely read it. If you are intrigued by the movies, watch them. You're not going to go wrong. We're going to land on saying the series is the best. But that's only because we like doing that and we like picking a winner.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with any of these versions.
It's ultimately going to be up to which medium speaks to you the most, which one you enjoy.
Yeah.
You know, I think that all of these have their merits.
Yeah.
Just maybe don't watch Purple Noon with the book in mind.
Yeah, maybe Purple Noon, watch it as its own thing.
Leave it, because again, it's a very classic film, and the cinematography is just incredible in that movie.
And Alain Delon.
And Alain Delon, of course. What do you think I meant by the cinematography?
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, I think that maybe watching it with a little distance between other versions would be better, because otherwise you're just stuck on like, well, that's so different and that doesn't work the same, and it's ultimately trying to accomplish something else. The focus is not on the mystery itself, or the conning. You know, it's more about different things. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. Like I said, I had no idea what was going to come out ahead in this one, but we got to make a decision, so we did.
I know we say this like every episode, but I so need you to watch the 99 movie.
Okay.
Because I really want to know if like that presentation of it makes it work better for you or not.
Yeah. I'm really curious because I don't know about the extra characters or not, because I kind of like Tom disappearing.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a really interesting tweak, so maybe it does work really well.
Like maybe don't think of it so much, like think of it as a standalone film.
Yeah.
But also like, especially in the beginning, I'm curious if like, that part of them traipsing around and like developing their relationship might work better.
Yeah, let me read a few more books and then I'll come back to it.
Gotta get some distance.
Let me forget the talented Mr. Ripley. All right, Alan. I think that about sums up our thoughts.
I think so.
But before we sign off, it's time for a little game.
I'm ready. I feel good. Got to talk about some great movies today.
This one's kind of funny, but I'm not going to tell you why yet. You ready?
Yes.
The tagline is "The True Story of a Real Fake."
True story of a real fake.
Yes.
Why does this seem like poignant for this conversation?
It's very poignant for this
Very
conversation. Yes. Do you want any hints?
Is it Catch Me If You Can?
It is Catch Me If You Can. And
Did you have this pulled out already?
I already had this selected.
Way, dude.
I already had this selected.
I was like, wait, that sounds perfect for that.
Yeah, I cannot believe it, but
That's so funny.
before we sat down, I was looking at my list and I was like, oh, I'm getting a little sparse. I got to look up more movies. And I also did a really bad job of record keeping. So some of them I think we've done, but I didn't mark. And I'm trying to remember.
Well,
but
I'll remember if
I knew we hadn't done this one.
No, we definitely didn't.
So I simply chose it because I knew we hadn't done it.
How perfect.
It was entirely a coincidence. And Alan, I think that's the first time you've gotten one without a single hint.
Not even a second, really.
Yeah. I didn't give you a year. I didn't give you anything.
I think that's notably because this is the first time that the film in question was mentioned earlier in the conversation.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so what's the synopsis? I didn't give one earlier.
I know, and I always give a synopsis. So, barely 21, Frank is a skilled forger who has passed as a doctor, lawyer, pilot. FBI agent Carl becomes obsessed with tracking down the con man who only revels in the pursuit. Mm-hmm. And as you said, it's Leonardo DiCaprio, but it also has Tom Hanks and Christopher Walken.
Yep.
2002 crime biography.
2002. Okay, so it did come a few years after. It shares a lot of DNA with Ripley.
Those are close enough.
Yeah.
I would say those are close enough.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's not quite as good of a movie in my opinion, but I do like it a lot.
But it's a fun one.
It's really fun to watch him like pretending to be a pilot with all the little stewardesses in tow walking through the airport.
Oh, I do know that scene.
Know that one.
That's a very iconic scene, right? Well, that's all for now. Thank you for listening to In Contrast. I'm Nisha.
I'm Alan.
Let us know what you think and your opinions. You can find us at In Contrast Pod on Instagram and Twitter, technically.
But we don't use that.
We really don't use it. Next up, we'll rate, review, and talk about The Color Out of Space, which we said we would do before and completely bunged it up and did the wrong Lovecraft thing. We're doing it for real, this time. We're doing The Color Out of Space. The movie, I believe, is also called The Color Out of Space.
Yes, and there's just one version.
Yeah. With Nicolas Cage.
I forgot he was in that.
Yep.
It's like 2019, right? It's like pretty recent, I think.
I have no idea.
Sometime recent.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no
Something
idea.
like that.
I just know that color is spelled differently because Lovecraft has a U.
British people.
Lovecraft's not British.
Yeah, but he wanted to act fancy.
He wanted to act fancy. It was ye old days. Anyway, see you all next time where we'll ask the important question, is the book really better than the movie?
Bye-bye.
Bye.